All right, so this next section is some heavy lifting here.
Right.
So we're gonna slow down just a little bit because this is
for our own purpose. Yeah, there's a lot of highlights in this part.
Yeah. So here's this question: is well-being a prudential or a moral good? Is it a prudential or a moral good? Right.
So is it found objectively, or is it good? Like it's prudent for me to, take a shower because then my wife won't kick me out of bed.
Right.
But is it a moral good that I do it?
Right.
Well,
right. In other words, is it instrumentally good that is useful, or is it intrinsically good? Right. In terms of this. So he says. So there's reason to think that merely taking well-being into account isn't enough to make Harris's theory of morality. Right. And so he says, let's back up a minute. Right. Mm-hmm. Remember that we're looking for a naturalistic theory of morality that's just based on what scientists can show, right? Brain states we started off with that seem to be problematic, right? Harris has offered a popular version of such of these theories, one of which he adds the words neuroscience. His view is that morality is a matter of well-being, and that if science can determine what constitutes well-being, then it determines morality.
This is what Harris is putting forth as an ability to get to a moral good.
Right. So if he's right, we need not engage in endless debates over whether abortion is wrong. We need only answer the question directly off science. Does abortion increase or decrease well-being or happiness? Yes or no? And, we can tell whether or not it is morally right or not. We don't have to fight over it. He says, but we've seen a few problems with Harris's view, right? One is that it seems highly questionable that morality can be reduced to well-being alone. We're not even sure what well-being is, but it doesn't even seem like, that it can be reduced to that. Right. And even if it could, there are reasons to doubt that the brain states are all there are to well-being. There may be something else more than just brain states. Remember the brain in the vat versus the real person. Have exact same brain states, but clearly I would rather be the real person than the brain in the vat.
Right.
Yeah. He says, furthermore, we've seen that Harris's theory places cats and naked mole rats within our moral circle. Right. So there you have it. And there seems to be no way to prevent this. Right. So we have to take in all of these creatures in our moral circle, any creature that has sentience, right, that can feel something, right. Pain, pleasure, whatever.
Have a brain. Right.
Yeah. Right. So there you go.
The scarecrow from Wizard of Oz is out. The lion is in.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So Harris's theory isn't faring so well. So it seems to me, he says, that there may be further problems with it. And so he wants to consider these. He says, to see this, he says, we have to look at the difference between prudential value and moral value, right? And he says that maybe that Harris's theory is really about the former and not the latter. Maybe that's what Harris is about. Right. His theory is maybe about prudential value, and really, in other words, he's missed the mark here. He's hit prudential value and not necessarily moral value. So what is it then? Well, to be prudentially value is to be good for a subject, not simply good, that is good in and of itself, right? So if something is good for something, we call that a prudential value, right? If something is good in and of itself, that's something different. We might say that's a moral value, or, right. Or at least there's a distinction there between them. Right?
Well, and reaching back in my old college days, Bakari and Bentham, crime is there because everyone wants to maximize pleasure, minimize pain. If you have a law that causes someone to question whether or not doing the action will either will not be enough, so that carrying out the undesired action will maximize pain, maximize pleasure over where they're at now, they're more likely to walk into the gas station and hold them up if they just get slapped with a $50 fine. Well, I just know that I have to steal $51 from the till in order to
make it worth it.
To make it worth it. Or you make it too extreme, where then people are scared, so you minimize the pain of doing it, and so that was their attempt to explain criminality in people, so that people wouldn't want to rob the convenience store because they would be put in jail, and so they're trying to minimize the pain and maximize the pleasure. It gives me way more pleasure not to be in jail. It causes me great pain to be in jail. So therefore, that's why I don't engage in criminal activity of that kind.
Right. Yeah. All right. So prudential. It's good for you to avoid being hit by the bus or or not ingesting salmonella, right?
Right. Yeah.
But these are not, generally speaking, moral goods. These types of things are prudential. They're not good in and of themselves, right? He wants to say that moral goods are, at least allegedly, good, period. Right? Those things. And so telling the truth, for instance, he says, isn't merely good for you, it's just plain good, morally good. Telling the truth is good from the point of view of the universe, he says. Of course, if there might be some exceptions to that. He talks about Nazis at the door or soldiers in Jericho at the door. Right?
The little classic. Does this make me look fat? You find your moral center in that question. Probably more so than maybe even the Nazis.
Telling the truth isn't good merely because it increases your well-being or even the well-being of others. It can also be good even when it harms you. You should tell the truth even if it hurts. That's so he's making the point there. Truth telling is good in and of itself, right? It's not just because it's good for you. That would be a prudential value. No, it's good in and of itself, and that's we consider a moral value, right? So again, this distinction he's trying to draw to make sure that we're clear on what's going on here.
And scientists need to have this distinction too, because it might be beneficial for me to lie on a scientific paper that gets me to the Nobel and I get $1 million and the accolades and everything like that. But it's wrong for me to fudge my numbers because that's the whole point of what the peer-reviewedness is. And probably if you're going to the Nobel, someone's going to check your work over,
multiple times. Multiple people.
Over maybe the lesser social sciences that always seem to squeak by with, whatever fad theory at the time is trying to be snuck in there as objective science. So, we should want to tell the truth. And is it more than just it's good for me? Because then you have competing values. I can get immediate pleasure now from doing it and getting away with it, and if it's found that I fudged numbers later, well then I'll just come up with a better lie or say, oh no I misplaced the 1 for the 0. You're right. My apologies, and then I can get out of it that way. But I made my mark, so it's beneficial for me to lie at one point. But we don't really want to say that because there seems to be more to thou shalt not lie
than just what's in it for me. And so now he says it's easy to conflate prudential values with moral values,
right?
Because prudential values do have a lot of characteristics that moral values do, and he lists several of them here. For instance, he says prudential values are objective. That is, that it's not determined by the subject's own judgment or well-being, right? We can know a prudential value independent of the person. So it's an objective type of thing, right? It's not dependent on the person. Brushing your teeth is good for us all, right? It's objectively good, right? So also prudential values are universal, right? They cut across all the people, right? All things are, all these values are common and universally applied to everyone, right? And he says prudential values are normative. There are reasons to pursue health. For example, there are reasons you ought to seek it, right? Brushing your teeth can give you a winning smile. So they are objective, they're independent of us, right? They're universal, even prudential values. They cut across, all of humanity is included in it, and they're normative. They give us reasons why we ought to act, which is similar to what moral values do. Right. We would say that at least moral realism says that their moral values are objective, they're universal, and they're normative.
We've done it. We found it.
All right. So, but clearly there's a difference between moral and prudential values is what he's trying to make. He says, despite the similarities between prudential and moral values, there are important differences. And now he's going to consider several differences here. He says, for one thing, even though prudential and moral values are objective, universal, and normal, prudential values appear to be conditional rather than absolute. In other words, they are if-then type of things. They are based on conditions. If this, then that, right?
If I brush my teeth, then I will have a winning smile.
That's right. So that is the ought in the prudential case, he says, you ought to brush your teeth, depends on your desires, right? You want a winning smile. So if I want a winning smile, then I ought to brush my teeth.
Right.
The ought there is prudential, right? It's based on a conditional phrase there, right? So he says this ought in the prudential case depends on your desires. That is, if you wish to avoid unneeded trips to the dentist, so and so and so and so, right?
I think this is just Mick Stokes trying to get us to brush our teeth more.
That's right. That's right. But he says moral oughts don't seem to be conditional in this way. They seem to lack the if part, right?
Right.
And so you ought to love your neighbor no matter what, not if anything.
Right.
Right? Regardless of what anyone thinks, regardless of your goals or your desires or your needs, you ought to love your neighbor. That's the right thing. That's a good thing to do. That's the morally right thing to do, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts or whatevers, right? So there don't seem to be any of these things. So he says prudential goods also, so that's one thing, right? Prudential goods are seem to be things that are have the if-then type of of way of saying them, right? They are conditional. They're conditional.
Right. So if you do this for lying, it's not if I want other people to tell me the truth, then I won't lie. Yeah. Well, no one cares.
Yeah,
no one cares, and no one knows.
Yeah. Right.
No one knows that you could want to be the most straight line truth telling person in the entire world, and there's nothing that causes other people to respond to you in similar fashion because of your actions, because of that. So
right. Yeah. So they're conditional. Moral truths are not conditional, right? Moral oughts are not conditional. They seem to lack the if part. Secondly, prudential goods seem to differ from moral goods in that moral value is others directed. So it's not about me with regard to moral value is what he says. So when we say we ought to brush our teeth, the reasons we typically give are those to benefit you, right? On the other hand, suppose we said that brushing your teeth is a form of loving your neighbor for obvious reasons.
Right.
This seems to elevate the prudential good of brushing your teeth into a moral one in that it is directed toward others and not myself. So number one, the conditionality of prudential goods are different than morality, because morality isn't conditional, is what he's suggesting. And number two, the self-directed versus other-directed notion. Prudential values seem to be self-directed. Morality seems to be directed toward others, right? So those are two, he suggests, important differences between morality and prudential values.
Right.
So he says, all of this is to say, as he quotes Murphy here, it does seem clear that we can distinguish conceptually between what is good for a person and what is just morally good, right? And so even if these often coincide in practice, but this distinction that Harris's view doesn't make. He says Harris has missed this particular distinction, right? In other words, he seems to be in danger of changing the subject and not giving us a theory of morality at all. Well-being alone seems to be a prudential good, something that is merely good for the subject experiencing it. Oops. So is it really morality, or is this just prudential good, right? Yeah. He says another way of saying the problem is that the concepts of morality and well-being can come apart. Because they're different, right?
Yeah, kind of think of it like a self-help book. Well, this would be helpful for me to how to win friends and influence people, but that's not to tell me how to treat them. Right. There might be factors of what benefits me in winning those friends or keeping those friends, but it doesn't tell me, why I shouldn't hurt people, other than a pure kind of that utilitarian point of view.
Yeah. And so he says, is it a moral reason or prudential reason? That's what he doesn't think Harris makes that distinction. In fact, he suggests that Harris is really talking about prudential reasons and not moral reasons, reasons that are good for the well-being of a person, as opposed to reasons that are good in and of themselves, which would make them morally good.
Right. And so then we get into the fun one of correlation versus causation. Would perfect correlation be good enough? The problem we're addressing is how naturalists might account for moral realism for the human independent experience of moral laws. And then he says, as we saw, there's something to the naturalistic view. Harris makes a plausible case for connecting well-being to morality. After all, it can be difficult to find examples in which a morally wrong action doesn't harm someone without reason. But harm does seem to track with moral wrongness. Okay, so let's suppose it does. That is, we'll assume that only morally wrong actions harm someone for no good reason. Moreover, let's assume that all and only morally right actions are those that don't harm someone for no good reason. I think that's being very generous, very generous. Now, if there were right and morality and well-being tracked together perfectly, would it be enough to secure Harris's view to show that morality is only a matter of well-being of sentient creatures? Or, to put the question more precisely, would Harris be correct in saying that well-being is what makes actions right? That's what we're asking. Well, certainly not. Merely in virtue of the fact, supposing it's a fact, that morally wrong actions always decrease the well-being of relevant individuals for no good reason, and morally right actions don't.
Right, so he's making the point of this correlation causation issue, right?
Right.
Yeah. Just because they correlate doesn't mean that,
Right.
Yeah.
I used to think that he's got the joke here from xkcd.com. I used to think correlation imputed causation. Then I took a statistics class. Now I don't. Sounds like like the class helped. Well, maybe.
Yeah, it might be just correlation.
Yeah, right.
So there's a distinction between correlation, where two things that are going together, and causation, where one thing is causing another.
Right.
And just because two things are tracking together doesn't mean that one or the other is causing the other.
And we did this in his science section with our graphs on the volume and temperature, but we also did it with pirates and global warming. So less pirates, more global warming. We need more pirates out in the world.
That's right.
It's not always the case. Of course, in many important cases, it's not always easy to distinguish correlation and causation. But I think there is reasons to doubt the calm that well-being is what causes or makes an action moral or immoral.
Yeah, so let's just say claim.
Oh, I'm sorry, claim.
Yeah.
Yes, we crossed out in our first reading. The claim that well-being is what causes or makes an act moral or immoral.
Yeah.
Because,
how do we know that those things correlate, right? Well-being and morality.
And it only seems like if you're looking, the road to hell is paved in good intentions. But you look back and you say, oh, it's so good that, the invasion of D-Day happened because, it was there that the Allies drew the line and pushed the Nazis back. Well, what if the best course of action was taking the Pacific and leaving, Hitler alone completely, and maybe that would be the case. Well, which cause or causation would provide the most for our well-being? Well, it depends on which side of the line you stand.
Yeah.
So think of it another way. Taking the thermometer example further. There was a good thermometer example.
That was a good example. Why don't you share that one?
So here's an example. The reading on the thermometer outside your kitchen window tracks the outside temperature. Whenever the thermometer reading increases or decreases, as it does here a lot in Michigan, the temperature outside also increases or decreases proportionally, right? A standard thermometer. Heat goes up, the mercury rises. Temperature goes down, mercury drops. But obviously the thermometer has no reading. Obviously the thermometer reading has no effect on the temperature outside your window. The causal chain runs in the other direction. Why? You're not. If you could.
Look, the thermometer is going up. It's going to get hot outside.
Yeah. If I was to turn the thermometer upside down and it ran down, then it's going to get hot. That's how we make it hot around here. So then he wants to take the thermometer example further. Notice that the thermometer reading can be an accurate indicator of temperature, but the temperature itself, the heat or energy contained in the air surrounding the thermometer, is caused by the motion of air molecules. Similarly, it may be that unnecessary harm is a good indicator or detector of a wrong act, but it need not be what makes the act wrong. And so you can kind of think about this of, early in the morning and, sun rises in the east, sets in the west, and your thermometer is facing east, and for an hour it's got direct sunlight where it hasn't had it. That mercury took a while to heat up, and so it spikes. And you think it's 98 degrees out. Well, it's only 70 out, or whatever it might be. So even showing that might not be a good indicator of what actually is the case. Of course, none of this shows that God's command makes the act wrong. That His decree is the ground, explanation, and cause of an act's wrongness, although I think it is. But it does seem to show that this religious explanation is consistent with well-being and morality, correlating perfectly. So why do we see actions that seem to take this, West, or really its foundations on Christian belief of things like justice and morality and these ethical dilemmas? Why does it seem like we kind of had the Christian worldview as the basing for it, and then all of a sudden we it's weird, but we see good actions that take a part of it. So justice in this world isn't always meted out, but it is in the next world, and so we would rather see 1,000 murderers go free than for one innocent man to spend time in jail. So that all is derived from a Christian worldview, and so society orientates itself to those values. Good things seem to happen. So you kind of have, even though if you don't believe in a God, you still enact in the way of these.
You act as if you do.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, there's more to that statement than not. But there's no surprise that we wouldn't see a benefit of acting in accordance with what the Christian God metes out, because if you just had Christians that say I live the most full life now in knowing that my sins are forgiven and I follow in footsteps with God, but for no matter what, I'm just always getting slogged down in the dirt, and all Christians are like that. It doesn't seem like what they would be saying matches up to what kind of God has declared. Now that still might happen to individuals, but it seems like there are blessing statements in the Bible that we orientate ourselves to, and obviously Christians get the most benefit out of it because there's a relationship there with the right understanding of action following from that belief, and then other people have co-opted it and tried to massage it, and ultimately it breaks down, and I think that's probably where we're at right now. Yeah. So that's where we're at now, and it doesn't seem like Dr. Stokes is buying the fact.
Yeah, right.
So we got to talk about values next.
Yeah. So he says, he really hasn't shown that well-being isn't what makes an action moral or immoral. He's merely shown that the perfect correlation doesn't connect the two causally.
Yeah,
right?
It's still possible, right?
So he needs to argue that moral rightness isn't causally dependent upon well-being. In order to do that, he says he needs to do some more work. And so we'll move over to the next chapter.
Right. Mm-hmm. So obviously you realize why we split this up into 2 episodes, and also I think everyone goes home now and brushes their teeth. So thanks for joining us for this week, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.